Alright, response video to Nick the Modern Mystic, another one. Yeah, he kind of sort of responded to my video, but he did it with, really as a Nick behaving badly kind of video. We're not politicians. We're two people talking on the internet. Doesn't mean anything. And yet he used the cop-out that, well, as soon as you start defining what you're going to cut, blah, blah, like there was going to be some political storm was going to fall on him. And, he just didn't deal with the question. I mean, it wasn't that horrible a question. What do you think is government responsibility, and what do you think it's not? What do you think should be a for-profit business, and what should be a non-profit business is basically the question. I mean, that's all government really is. And we know, again, point out the liabilities of government. What are the liabilities? Basically, it's allowing the workers to vote for their salary. So that's a real problem. So you have to fix that. You can't give them the power to define their rights and responsibilities. That's just kind of silly. So the management's got to be a little harsher. There's got to be more consumer input and a little less labor input. And that's really the balance, right? Who else is involved? Who else exists that matters? Consumers and producers in terms of labor. And you got these rich jackasses, this tiny minority of human beings. Yeah, and you just don't deal with the real numbers. You don't deal with the fact that, it can be repeated, these 8,000 households that control as much wealth as the bottom 70 or 60 million Americans. These are, and you just run from it. I pointed out that the fact that taxes on the rich have gone down over the last 3 decades, and that a lot of that can explain the bubble economy, because not paying their taxes and also printing government money to compensate for the money they're not contributing creates a scenario where that printed money will end up going into the stock market. Especially when the government does so much contracting with private industry. So again, people can talk about government's dysfunctionality, but how much of every government dollar is going to some private contractor somewhere in the end? I mean, the government's not doing the hiring and firing. The government's not doing the work. It's contracting work to the very instrument it should be protecting us from, which is the for-profit interest, the owner's interest. So again, there's no point in doing it because you're just not going to play, but I'm going to play anyway. Look, the economy is based on this consumer-producer thing, and the idea is to turn producers into consumers and turn consumers into producers, and to keep that flow going back and forth, production, consumption. You consume, the money goes back into production. The money you use for your consumption goes back to investment into production. It just keeps going. And obviously there's some things that are kind of dead-endy. Okay, I mean, the healthcare thing is a necessary service for human beings. They want that stuff. I think they want a little too much than they're entitled to because they're not realizing that somebody's got to pay for it. But that's a whole different argument. But yeah, it's really inefficient. I mean, we don't get a whole lot of value out of, some 70-year-old guy we saved with a triple bypass surgery. That doesn't do the economy much good. It doesn't do the rest of the human beings on Earth much good. It's not a Hoover Dam kind of investment. But so we can find things in the economy that are just places where money sort of dies. Once it gets spent there, there's no reward from it. The money still does live. Obviously, the doctors who get paid, they consume, so the money stays in the economy. It's still moving around, but we're not getting that productivity gain, the thing that's going to help grow the economy. Instead, we're getting kind of something that's going to be a lag on the economy, something that's going to drag it a little, because we got a lot of labor that's not productive anymore. And the key word is to have productive labor, not wasted labor. We don't want to pay people, as I said before, to spin around in a circle. And when you're laboring, polishing somebody's toenails or something, you're wasting your time. When you're building yachts, you might be doing good work. I mean, you might be a nice worker. You might do quality work. But it's a waste of labor. There's no social value in that labor. And that's just part of this whole, thing we call civilization. It's where we want people wasting their time building. And then there's the argument that capitalism is enslaving people. The Dubai example, where they basically kidnap people from other countries with lies, seduce them into this trap, and then force them to work, and then indebt them so they can't even leave. So you have to keep working just to survive, just to keep the cot they're sleeping on and not be in jail. It's insidiously draconian. And the argument that we all as human beings should compete with that is, I think, ludicrous, indefensible, preposterous nonsense. But again, I'd still argue that there's enough insulation between these territories that you could even do that. You could have slaves in another country, in China, and that really shouldn't have anything to do with the functionality of your country. You should still be able to circulate enough investment capital in your own country to get things done, as long as you're careful about what you're investing in. And like I said, the government takes on responsibilities that aren't going to be taken care of by the private sector. They're not going to provide health care for people who can't pay for it. They're not going to do a lot of things. And so, yeah, government's going to have a hard time running a profit when it's doing the stuff the profiteers won't invest in, and the stuff that only pay off in the long term, and might not pay off any more than just getting back what your investment was. I mean, government can afford to do that. Government can afford to make investments where it doesn't make a profit. It just gets its money back. And again, you're so dismissive of these arguments, and it's so casual this way you sit there and say there's something magic about the owners. And you've seen enough of this system. You see how it works. The owners don't do anything anymore. All these public companies and all these stock price and these CEOs, they're all driven for profit. You see the shortcuts. You see the complete inefficiency of so much of what they do, because it's all about undercutting somebody else. It's all about this, an angle, leverage to force somebody else out of business rather than to prove they're the better. I mean, they're always trying to find some way to have the other guy break his leg before he gets into the ring, and huge investments in that kind of crap, and the PR bullshit, the marketing, all the waste that is built into that system, and to just sit there and say it's all okay, it's so much better that way. It has to be that way. Even that argument is just such nonsense. We know what runs a business. You put somebody accountable at the top, and you say, run the business. And if you run it crappy, they're going to replace you. So you're not going to get your money anymore. You're going to lose your job. Not a big deal. But yeah, you have to have that power. That person has to have power to do something. And if they don't have power to do anything, and if all they're there for is because it's some sweetheart deal and they're supposed to be feathering a bunch of beds, like I'm sure happens in the average foundation set up by one of these rich assholes. I mean, I bet you there's lots of feathered beds, in every one of those things. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. So anyway, just a huge cop-out, Nick. Come on. I'm not afraid to itemize what I would cut out of government, but I'm also not afraid to say that we know where the money is. You made a video and you actually said the money has run out. You said those words. The money hasn't run out. There's a ton of fucking money. It's just caught up in eddies of surplus held by rich people. So I'll go back to my example of consumer, producer, producer, consumer. It just keeps flowing between those two. One guy produces, the other guy consumes. One guy consumes, the other guy produces, and it just keeps flowing. And what happens when there's a third party there, they end up trapping it in an eddy. So it doesn't flow anymore in the economy. It's trapped in an eddy of surplus. A fifth house, a sixth house, a seventh house, an eighth house, a 10th house, a 400th house, and it gets trapped in this eddy, and that eddy ends up having its own gravity after a while. It just keeps pulling more and more out of the economy, out of the functional economy, and into this eddy that's always going to demand a profit. So it's always going to be investing in something where it's taking a huge chunk of the productivity out of whatever the producer's producing. So it's always going to be leaching so much out of production that there's not going to be, the consumer's not going to get the deal. So the relationship between consumer and producer is destroyed, because this eddy is going to keep demanding feeding. It's like that feed me. It's like that giant plant thing. I mean, I was with the red jar, feed me, and they just keep getting bigger and bigger and want more and more, and that's the problem we're in right now. There's so many that they're demanding so much profit from the system. All the money is trapped in their hands, and they're demanding the weight of that eddy, of that huge demand for more profit, is sucking all the value out of our lives. The fact is the average worker could get 3 times as much money for his labor if we got rid of that eddy. If we just get rid of that stupid Seymour monster plant that just wants to eat everything in sight. Kill that fucker. We don't need it. We don't need Seymour. So anyway, enough of video. So anyway, but yeah, lame, Nick. Come on, behaving like a politician.